Thank you so much for staying with us. Let's go into our business right away. Jude Ohanele, a lawyer, is the program director, developments. Dynamics is not actually a lawyer. He joins us now to take stock of the travails of human rights defenders in Nigeria. That's those that are insisting on the observance of human rights and liberties. To what extent are they allowed to do their work in freedom? Is the state, sometimes non-state actors, going after them and stopping them from doing so? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Amici.
Okay, I said earlier, the hope was that as we deepen our democracy, human rights observation in Nigeria will be higher. But it appears not to be so.
Yeah, I mean, you are hoping against hope, actually. And to start is just to note that it is my considered view, and you can quote me profusely, that Nigeria is not a democracy. Because, when you say you are deepening democracy, it means you have democracy you want to deepen. Nigeria is not a democracy by all the standards.
We have periodic elections.
You know the tenets of democracy.
All the tenets, periodic election. We have political parties in existence. We have a National Assembly. We have every organ associated with democracy operational.
Yeah, all the pretenses, you can mention them as much as you like, but that doesn't make it a democracy. For all intent and purpose, the tenets are clear. You need to have free, fair, and credible elections. There should be clear separation of power. There should be transparency in all public dealings. There should be a free press. And all of that. When you don't have that and you are pretending that you are a democracy, you are joking. So I think Nigeria is a civilian experiment that has not really evolved effectively since 1999 because of the elements involved in this experiment.
If the world can refer to Rwanda as a democracy, in terms of rights observation and others, many will argue we are miles ahead. Why will you also not say Nigeria is a democracy?
Well, that's my considered view, and that debate we can have it appropriately. But the truth is that Nigeria is a civilian experiment. The difference between the military era and now is just that these guys are wearing civilian uniform. Look across the state and see what is happening. A lot of impunity in the land. Look at what has happened in Edo State. You had it in the review you had before now. And you see that we're just messing ourselves up, pretending that we're a democracy. The world knows we are not. And that's why the global policy on Nigeria is basically a policy of containment. And it's important that we sit up to this reality and move this civilian experiment to a democratizing experiment. We are at the zero level. We've not moved an inch.
Some will argue
it's very important.
There is no democracy that is perfect. Even the bastion of democracy in the world, the U.S. is having somewhat these kind of challenges we are having here. Presidential candidates are targeted for assassination. Huge allegations of vote manipulations and all that, violence here and there. So is it peculiar to Nigeria? Is it not a global thing whereby you need to build your democracy, sacrifice to get it up to a higher level?
Well, when you talk about what is happening in the U.S., it is basically like comparing apples with oranges. You can have some people who are emotional about losing elections in the U.S. and talking. But you know as much as I do that based on data available and all the judgments you've had from the U.S. court, that there is no evidence of all these levels of manipulation being talked about by a certain candidate there. So you can't compare it to the mess we have here that we call elections. We are nowhere. Everybody knows. Even the guys who are presumably elected, they knew clearly that they have no mandate. And that's
Even when the Supreme Court will affirm these elections?
Well, whatever the Supreme Court says is final. But, Supreme Court is final. It's supreme because their decision is final. But, of course, as the decisions continue to run against the tenets, that's also to the extent that all of us are in danger. But, we'll leave that. Let's talk about human rights today. On a good day, you invite me, then we can look at this whole election and democracy issue.
But is that they are all intertwined, as it were. There are
sure.
links
of course,
between this and that.
Yeah, because the reality is that because our political elements have not followed the standards for human rights, they have continued to roll us backwards. And it's unfortunate, because Nigeria, the entire African community is waiting for Nigeria. This is the highest collection of African people anywhere in the world. So what it means is that...
Even the black race.
Basically. So what it means is that when Nigeria moves, the African people will move. I don't know about black people, but I know we are Africans, you know. I don't know who is white or who is black. My skin color is not black. So, but the highest collection of African people in the world is here. And we need to know that that's an obligation on us as a people to create standards that can elevate us. I mean, we can model ourselves with what is happening in Botswana. Botswana is a very beautiful African experiment that Nigeria can scale and show the world that it is possible for African people to organize themselves, to set up standards, to make life very conducive for their people, and to move the entire African continent to the next level. The world is waiting for us. Huge resources out here, and we are trampling down on the human rights of our people, and people are pretending that we are existing.
Let's get from you what you've been picking in terms of the travails of the defenders of human rights in Nigeria. The issue of government repression is an allegation that won't go away.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the government hasn't done what it ought to do. And interestingly, the government has an obligation to respect human rights. And you know, as stated in the Constitution, the essence of government is the welfare, security and welfare of the people. And you can't do any of these two without anchoring them on human rights. You know, so to the extent that the government has not prioritized human rights issues, insisting on that, that's to the extent that everybody is suffering. And of course, those who are on the front line of human rights defense in Nigeria are bearing the brunt, unfortunately. And you know, you see cases of harassment, cases of threat, cases of unnecessary detention, cases of all kinds of intimidation, you know, just to stop people from advocating and defending human rights. And that is not the best. And it is worse that a good chunk of it comes from state actors, who are actually the ones that are the custodians of the human rights of the people. And by all UN statute that Nigeria is a state party to, starting from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights up to the Declaration of Human Rights Defenders, Nigeria is a state party to all of this and is committed to work progressively, as it were, to make sure that these rights are realized. But we are doing little or nothing about them. The right to life in Nigeria is almost non-existent.
Even with legislations being passed here and there to protect human rights, Human Rights Commission established operational and all that. Are these legislations not strong enough to offer such protection?
Well, I give it to the fact that the National Human Rights Commission Establishment Act has been strengthened in line with recommendations from the Universal Periodic Review of Nigeria. You know, all the countries in the world are reviewed comprehensively on the basis of their human rights performance every 4.5 years. And one of the major recommendations that came out of our review when this started in 2009 is that Nigeria needed to work on the Establishment Act of the National Human Rights Commission, which has been worked on. But that seemed to be simply the only thing the government of Nigeria has done. Of all the tens and hundreds of recommendations that Nigeria has received. So to that extent, the law is there. But the enabling environment for the National Human Rights Commission to do its job effectively is not there. The political space is still militarized. A lot of challenges, little things, civic activities that people conduct over the world in peace and harmony. If you start doing that here, they'll start saying that you're an enemy of the state. You see a government official use public money to go on air to dissuade people from peaceful protest, when it is guaranteed that people have a right to peaceful protest. So how would they express themselves when you bottle up the entire frustration in the system? Rather than creating the environment for people to express themselves.
Some NSAS and bad governance protesters are undergoing treason trial.
Basically, that's telling you how backward we are as a people. How on earth will a person who is demonstrating for his right be charged for treason? That means you are belittling the whole charge of treason, and it makes the whole thing a big joke.
Okay, he said from state actors, they are also from non-state actors who don't appear to also beam a searchlight on them. Terrorist groups here and there, government, militant group, violate rights of citizens and defenders. And it's not just what we should ignore.
Yeah, of course, that happens. And, it's worsened over the years, that non-state actors are becoming very prominent in human rights abuses. But that's basically a reflection of the failure of the state. Because normally, in a standard setting, the state should have monopoly of violence.
A monopoly over the use of firearms.
Force and whatever. Now, the state is crumbling, essentially, when you have a lot more non-state actors within a geographical territory acting And it seems not that anybody has done anything to really push back on them and all that. So it's a challenge. So part of it is that there is need for all of us to support our government and to insist on minimum standards. Because when you improve governance, then the non-state actors will lose their capacity to inflict injury on the state.
And even to recruit members.
Absolutely, because it's also driven by poverty. When you deny people the right to basic existence, the right to food, and the right to healthcare, and you have gangs of groups that seem to promise them such rights, they follow them. And that's why it's very easy for people in this part of the world to recruit our young people and put them to violence, which is something we can work on. So the reality here, why we are here, is to insist that all stakeholders need to come together for us to understand that Nigeria is failing because Nigeria is not prioritizing human rights. And there is need for us to prioritize human rights from the presidency downwards. And luckily for us, we have a president who was part of civic struggle before he became a president. So it's important for those around him to help him. Because one of the legacies he can leave behind here would be that he moved the realization of the human rights of Nigerians from where he met it to the next level. For me, that is the only way you can rate whether he has done well or he has not done well. And it is important for those around him to understand this, and for him himself to focus on this, to make sure that the obligation this country has in terms of human rights are all respected. That the government commits to protecting and promoting human rights. And it starts by protecting and promoting the human rights defenders, because they are the ones in the front line, so that you don't classify human rights defenders as enemies of the state. They are actually the best friends of the state, because the function of the state is to uphold human rights. And that's why it is not a mere coincidence that the countries that respect human rights most have the highest human development indices. Look at all the countries in the Scandinavia. Your Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and all of that.
On the area of weak legislation, what can we do? Because they talked about non-state actors, and we need to institute good governance to push them out of this space. For weak legislations, what are the ways out?
The ways out is that the National Assembly needs to sit up to its responsibility. And that's why it's important for us, really, to get the elections process right, so that those who will go to the National Assembly are those who have the capacity to make laws. Because unfortunately now, with this very lousy electoral process, we have a lot of people in the National Assembly that have no business being in the National Assembly. Because for you to be in the National Assembly and function effectively, you have to have the capacity to read a document, analyze the document, and make your input. But when you have a collection of people who can barely read a page of a document, then you have a problem. So the whole issue of quality lawmaking is not being prioritized. And that's why it's important for us to insist on those minimum standards. And of course, for those who are there already, who have the capacity to help their colleagues to begin to understand that there are basic legislations we need to put in place to move our country to the next better level. And one of those legislations is to domesticate the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. This is a declaration that Nigeria is a state party to, that the General Assembly of the UN adopted in 1998. 1998 till now, you know how many years it is. Nigeria has done nothing. And the Article 2, Sub 2 of that document say that all the state parties shall make the legislative adjustment to bring that declaration, into force. And Nigeria hasn't done that. So, but luckily for us now, the chair of the House of Reps Committee on Human Rights, Honorable Abiola Makinde, has committed himself to moving the needle forward on this, to work on this. There's already a process to have that declaration domesticated, which is the first step in making sure that human rights defenders are recognized by law. And what that will do is that a lot more young people who have the mental energy can now get into human rights work.
By recognition by law, what does it entail?
What it entails is that the law recognizes that human rights defenders are working for the state, for the progress of society.
Are not enemies of the state.
Not enemies of the state. They are protected. Their own rights are protected and supported by law. So there are several other provisions in that bill which they are working on. By the time they are through, we'll go through them. But then the summary of it is that the human rights defenders are protected comprehensively, such that people don't wake up in the morning just because you are wearing a police uniform or one other security uniform. You go and arrest a human rights defender who is doing a peaceful protest just to show that you are working for the government. It doesn't make any sense. People do protests all over the world. People push their issues. What you do is to intellectually engage with the issue. So what is it that you are demanding? And what is it that the state
Does
is
it
able
not
to do?
go beyond laws and domestication of these conventions to orientation of our institutions and those that drive the institutions? For instance, bail is free. Everybody knows that, but deep down, in operation, it's not free. So for these security operatives to really get in tune with this new direction, this new philosophy, we need a lot of reorientation and perhaps re-education.
Yeah, I mean, you educate people based on law.
So the law
So
should be
law,
the first
law is the first step.
port of call.
Sure. Because you need to anchor your engagement under the law. You see, this program we are doing on human rights defenders in Nigeria is supported by the government of France. Now, the government of France is able to support this outside their country because there is a law in France that empowers them to do this. If there is no such law, they won't do it. And that's why we're very grateful because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's unfortunate that a huge country like this, we have to wait for people from outside here to help us to talk about our fundamental rights, which are being degraded every day. You know, so the idea here is that you first of all have a law. Because the question is, what you are doing, is it covered by the law? Because if it's not covered by the law, it's an emotional trip, which doesn't make any sense. So when you have the law, on the basis of the law, because the law even have protocol on how you educate your people. You know, there's a commitment to do that, and the National Human Rights Commission and all the human rights organizations in the country can now be protected by the law to continue to work on the education of the people in terms of human rights. Of course, the National Human Rights Commission Act has already settled that of the National Human Rights Commission. But in terms of collaboration with other human rights organizations, this law will not provide that. And with the visibility and cover of the law, the continuous reorientation of our people will now commence more effectively. And of course, it is a reorientation that will be driven by the state actors. And that's why I tell you, when you have better organized elections that throw up more reasonable human beings, and they get into the space and begin to see Nigerians as their fellow human beings, and understand that you don't wake up one morning and throw up a lousy policy that will sink the economy. You need to dialogue. My brother, we want to do this. My sister, we want to do this. What do you think? They bring their own views. You look at it. Okay, look at the strength of this policy. Look at the weaknesses. Looking at the strength and the weaknesses, which one works best for our people? And you come to a consensus and say, okay, on the basis of probability of success, we are better off with this. And you push it. And the system will continue to evolve organically. And people will be happy. And even if we have challenges, it will be our challenges. You know, we are all involved in it. So we can all now begin to look at how to troubleshoot our challenges. But a situation where you have people who think the people on the other end are not human beings. So you wake up one morning, you make one lousy policy and destroy people's life, and people are dying, and you think you are a government. You're only pretending to be government. You're basically undertakers.
We have to thank you so much, Jude Ohanele, Program Director, Development Dynamics, for joining us today.
Thank you, Amechi, my brother.
We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll focus on the House of Representatives resuming after months of recess. How are they going to be confronting the numerous challenges facing the country?